Hello, this is Josh Patel, and today I am bringing you another biology lesson. Today we'll be working in Unit 2, which is all about cells, and it covers chapters 3, 4, and 5. So today we'll be doing chapter 4, which is all about cells and energy, lesson 5, which is cellular respiration in detail. So our last video was just an overview of cellular respiration, and it didn't go in detail at all. It was very brief and simple. So today we are learning about the more of the process of how it actually works. Last time we just learned about the concept basically. So our key concept for today is cellular respiration is an aerobic process with two main stages. And as we all should know, aerobic means with oxygen. So cellular respiration uses oxygen, it requires oxygen. And we should also know it has two main stages. And yes, so that's all we need to know for the key concept. And so glycolysis is needed for cellular respiration. So here's just a question to test your knowledge. Is glycolysis a part of cellular respiration or not? I'll give you a few seconds to think about that. So if you answered no, it is not a part of cellular respiration, you are correct. Glycolysis is a separate thing. It is not involved in cellular respiration. So the products of glycolysis enter cellular respiration when oxygen is available. So since it says the products enter cellular respiration, we know for a fact it's not part of cellular respiration. So in our next video, we will be learning about fermentation, which is an add-on to glycolysis. So if glycolysis has oxygen to use, it will enter cellular respiration because it says it will enter cellular respiration when oxygen is available. But if there is no oxygen available, it will enter a thing called fermentation, which we will learn about in the next video. So if you watch the next video, it'll be easier to remember that glycolysis is not part of cellular respiration because it can also be an add-on to another topic called fermentation. So this is the process of glycolysis. So two ATP molecules are used to split glucose. So these ATP molecules energize the glucose, causing it to split into two 3-carbon molecules. And so when we do this, we use 2 ATP, which is energy, and the ATP, once it's used up, turns into ADP, because it transferred all its energy into the molecules. And so then these two 3-carbon molecules are turned into 2-pyruvate. And so when doing this, the energized electrons from the two 3-carbon molecules enter NAD+, which is exactly like NADP+, which was in photosynthesis, and it's like exactly the same thing. So in photosynthesis we had NADP+, and then NADP+ turned into NADPH, if you recall. And so this section, this part here, NAD+ and NADPH, is exactly like the other two, but in photosynthesis it has a P, so I guess you can remember the one in photosynthesis has a P because photosynthesis has a P. So you can remember NADP goes with photosynthesis, but NAD+ goes with cellular respiration. So it's the same exact concept. So the energized electrons enter the NAD+ and turn into NADH, which is an energy transfer. So the electrons go into it, and it becomes NADH. And as this is going along, ADP is also transferred into ATP. So a series of reactions convert the 3-carbon molecules to pyruvate, and then the pyruvate has to be changed also before it goes into the cellular respiration. So our net gain, or our output of glycolysis, is 2 ATP, 2 NADH, and 2 pyruvate. And you may be wondering, why isn't it just, why don't we just say 4 ATP, because that's what we made, but it's only 2 ATP because we also used 2 ATP in the beginning. So we gained 4, but we used 2, so 4 minus 2 is 2. So we have 2 ATP. So again, we have 2 ATP, 2 NADH, and 2 pyruvate. And the NADH is used as energy to power our next one of the cycles in cellular respiration. And the ATP is used as energy for the cell, because that's what ATP is used for. So the Krebs cycle is the first main part of cellular respiration. So we learned that in our last video, or in the overview of cellular respiration. So pyruvate is broken down before the Krebs cycle. So before pyruvate can enter the Krebs cycle, it has to be broken down first. So this process is part of cellular respiration. It can't just enter as pyruvate, it has to be broken down. So when it gets broken down, carbon dioxide is released and NADH is produced. So the pyruvate molecule is split into a 2-carbon molecule and a molecule of carbon dioxide. So as we know, pyruvate looks like this. It has 3 carbons, and so it's split into a 2-carbon molecule here. So one of the carbons has to be gone, so that's the one that goes into and becomes CO2. But also, once doing this, we turn NAD plus into NADH, which is more energy for the next cycle, which is the electron transport chain. This is what we need to power that. So after we get NADH from the high energy electrons that were transferred from the 2-carbon molecule to NAD plus to make it NADH, there's another molecule that comes, or an enzyme that comes into play. So once we have our 2-carbon molecule, and a coenzyme A, which is in abbreviation is CoA, bonds to the 2-carbon molecule. So the coenzyme A here bonds here. So as you see, it's the 2-carbon molecule and the coenzyme A. So it bonds to the carbon molecule. So coenzyme A bonds to the 2-carbon molecule. This intermediate molecule enters the Krebs cycle. So this is the beginning of the Krebs cycle, this intermediate molecule. It enters the Krebs cycle, and so the Krebs cycle produces energy-carrying molecules, which, as we know, is NADH, and there's another one we don't know yet, which is FADH2. So these energy-carrying molecules basically just carry energy or electrons, like charged electrons, to the next stage. So the Krebs cycle produces energy-carrying molecules. So NADH and FADH2 are made. So the intermediate molecule with CoA enters the Krebs cycle. So this is where we left off, the CoA molecule. It enters the Krebs cycle and it attaches to a 4-carbon molecule which was already there. So if we look at this picture, this is the 4-carbon molecule and it's already in the Krebs cycle. It stays in there and it just keeps rotating around. So it's not like it just spontaneously generates. So the CoA molecule enters and transfers or bonds to this to create a 6-carbon molecule. And once it bonds, the CoA enzyme leaves and comes back. So it basically just carries it there, or it stays while it's on its way there. So it bonds to the 4-carbon molecule, and it creates a 6-carbon molecule. And this is called citric acid. So citric acid is formed, which is a 6-carbon molecule, because 2 plus 4 is 6. So the 2-carbon molecule we had and the 4-carbon molecule we had bonded together to create citric acid. So citric acid is broken down through enzymes, and carbon dioxide is released, and NADH is made. So if we look here, citric acid is broken down and NADH is made. So this is our citric acid, and this is what it becomes. Enzymes break it down into a 5-carbon molecule, and while this is happening, NAD plus comes and turns into NADH because of the energized electrons. So the 5-carbon molecule is again broken down through enzymes, and carbon dioxide is released, and NADH and ATP are made. So if we look here, our 5-carbon molecule here comes and it gets broken down again by enzymes. A CO2 is released right here. That's why each time CO2 is released, it goes down by 1 the molecule. So it started from 6 CO2 released, now it's 5. And now another CO2 released, now it turns into a 4-carbon molecule. And NADH and ATP, so both of them are released. And the ATP goes and turns to energy for the cell, while the NADH is used to carry energy into the next stage of the cycle. So the 4-carbon molecule is rearranged. So after it becomes a 4-carbon molecule, it's in the wrong order, so it's rearranged. And while it rearranges, the 4-carbon molecule produces NADH and FADH2. So as you see here, this 4-carbon molecule is rearranged, and it forms this one. But they look exactly the same, but just think and imagine they got rearranged. And so while this happens, we created NADH2 and FADH2, which are energy transferring electrons, or energy carrying molecules. So the electron transport chain is the second main part of the cellular respiration process, and the electron transport chain uses NADH and FADH2 to make ATP. So the first stage's major goal was to produce NADH and FADH2, basically just to power the electron transport chain. And now the electron transport chain's job is just to produce a lot of ATP. So high energy electrons enter the electron transport chain. So as our 4 molecules got rearranged, the electrons or energy transferred into these molecules. So as we remembered, as we learned, NAD plus to become NADH has to gain 2 energized electrons. So basically they just take energized electrons and transport them here. It's like a bus, and it just transports these electrons. So high energy electrons enter the electron transport chain. So these electrons come on their bus of NADH and FADH2, and they are dropped off in so this is all happening in the mitochondria, and the first section started in the matrix of the mitochondria, and now this part, the electron transport chain, happens in the mitochondria or the inner mitochondrial membrane. So as we know, the mitochondria has a bunch of folds inside. This is happening inside one of the folds, or in the membrane. So the bus drops off these electrons here, and the proteins in the membrane take these electrons or this energy, and they use it to transport hydrogen ions across the inner membrane. If this is sounding familiar, it really is, because in photosynthesis, this is the exact same thing that happens. It takes the hydrogens from one side of the border and crosses it over to the other, and this helps produce energy. So the energy is used to transport hydrogen ions across the membrane. So it takes it from the outside, and it collects it all inside the membrane. So hydrogen ions flow through a channel in the membrane. So, hold on. So let's look at the step-by-step picture. So, this is our membrane. As we know, we can see the phospholipids. And so, this is the outside of the cell. So, our NADH and FADH come here. They give their electrons to the membrane. And the membrane uses, or the proteins in the membrane, proteins in the inner membrane, use it to transport hydrogen ions from outside to inside. And so they all cluster inside, creating a concentration gradient. So the gradient is there's more hydrogen ions inside than outside. And so they would naturally want to diffuse outside to even it out. So they go through the ATP synthase, as we learned, which is also in photosynthesis, and it just takes them and helps convert ADP to ATP. So it adds a phosphate group, as we know, and so it creates ATP, which is energy for the cell. So it creates more energy. And then at the end of all this, we know oxygen is used for cellular respiration, and we didn't learn about oxygen doing anything yet. So you might be wondering, what is oxygen for? So the oxygen is basically for the cleanup job, or it just cleans everything up. So the oxygen comes in, and it just cleans up the cell. So the O2 comes in, and it picks up the electrons from the membrane that are de-energized, because if they don't have any more energy for anything, they're just useless. So once they use the energy to transport the hydrogen ions, they come out and the oxygen picks it up, and the oxygen also picks up the hydrogen ions, which once they exit the ATP synthase, and it collects it to make H2O. So oxygen takes the hydrogen ions, so that's there you have your O and the H's, but they also need two electrons, as we remember in our photosynthesis review, or photosynthesis video. The water came in and gave off two of its electrons to the photosystem, so it needs those back now. So the oxygen is collecting it from the membrane to create water. And that's why water is one of our waste products from cellular respiration. It comes from the oxygen. So this is how we make our ATP. Whoops. Okay. So hydrogens flow through the channel in the membrane. So the breakdown of one glucose molecule produces up to 38 molecules of ATP. So that's a lot of ATP, and that's the whole point of this process, the electron transport chain, to produce ATP, or energy, for our cell. So ATP synthase produces ATP. Oxygen picks up electrons and hydrogen ions, so it just cleans up the cell. And water is released as our waste product. So this is the end of the video. Before we close and end, let's go over some of the photosynthesis and some cellular respiration. We'll compare and contrast them. So we're gonna pick a section and we're gonna just compare and contrast. So organelles of four processes. So in photosynthesis, what's its special organelle? If you remember to chapter 3, which is all about cells, the organelle is the chloroplast, which is the green mitochondria looking thing in a plant cell. And the chloroplast basically collects sunlight and uses it to do photosynthesis. So that's its special organelle. And for animal cells, they have the mitochondria, which initially does the same thing, but it doesn't absorb sunlight. It makes energy for, it just does the process of cellular respiration. So the reactants, which are, if you remember, is the starting point of our equation, or what causes something to happen. So our reactants of photosynthesis have to be CO2 and H2O. As we know, plants take in our poisonous carbon dioxide from the air, and they also take in water to live and to do photosynthesis. So those are the two things they take in to do photosynthesis. While we, for cellular respiration, need sugar, which is our food, and oxygen, which is why we need to breathe. So a nice thing to know is that plants also do cellular respiration. They don't only do photosynthesis. So, because if they only do photosynthesis, they have a bunch of sugar, but they can't use their sugar to do anything if they don't do cellular respiration. So plants actually do both. They do photosynthesis and cellular respiration. So you also need to know that. So let's now go on to the next topic, which is the electron transport chain. If you realize that they both have the electron transport chain, good for you. That means you're very knowledgeable and you're interacting everything you learned. So the electron transport chain in photosynthesis is within proteins within the thylakoid membrane. So as remember, the thylakoid, in their membrane, we had the photosystems and everything. And that is where the electron transport chain was. It was between the photosystems to transport it to the next photosystem. So, and then in cellular respiration, it's proteins within inner mitochondrial membrane. So in cellular respiration, it's within the mitochondria's membrane. So it's technically like in the same spot but on different organelles. And then the cycle of chemical reactions. So as we know, we have two different cycles. We have the Calvin cycle and we have the Krebs cycle. Now, we also need to know which one goes with which one goes with photosynthesis and which goes with cellular respiration. So, if we think hard, we'll remember that the Calvin cycle is for photosynthesis, and it happens in the stroma of chloroplast, and it creates sugar. So, the Calvin cycle happens in the stroma, and the stroma is the fluidy liquid stuff that fills up the chloroplast, and it's used to build sugar because that's what photosynthesis does. And then for cellular respiration, we obviously have the other one, which is the Krebs cycle. And the Krebs cycle happens in the matrix of the mitochondria, which is also the stuff in between the layers of skin or the membrane. And the Krebs cycle is used to break down carbon-based molecules and to produce ATP for our cell. So that's it for the cycles, and now we're on our last thing, which is the products. And products are what we end up with. So for photosynthesis, we end up with sugar, and also we end up with oxygen. So plants take in the material and produce sugar and oxygen, while in cellular respiration, we make CO2, carbon dioxide, and water, which is H2O. But there's another one that they forgot to include in here, which is all ATP, because the main point of cellular respiration is to make ATP. So if you also realize that the products and reactants of photosynthesis and cellular respiration are the same thing but flip-flop, good for you. Because our reactants of photosynthesis are CO2 and H2O. So for photosynthesis, we need water and we need carbon dioxide. And so that's the same as what we're left off with in cellular respiration. So our reactants for photosynthesis are the same as our products of cellular respiration, and the same for the other one. So our products of photosynthesis, which is sugar and oxygen, is what animals need for cellular respiration. They need the sugar and they need the oxygen to do cellular respiration. So it's initially the same thing. So this is the end to our lesson for today, which was on chapter 4, which is all about cells and energy, and it's lesson 5, which is cellular respiration in detail. So if you missed anything or you need to review it, make sure you go back and watch this video a couple of times, or just the points that you missed, because you probably didn't catch everything this first time, because this is a very complicated lesson. And so our next video will be on chapter 4, lesson 6, and it'll be our last lesson for this chapter. And lesson 6 is all about fermentation. And fermentation is a very easy lesson, and it's just an add-on to glycolysis. So make sure you watch that video, and hopefully you'll get everything in that one very quickly compared to the photosynthesis in depth and cellular respiration in depth. And so good luck in your quest in biology.